So this week I had the honor of training the New York Police Department in New York. And I was doing a training on conflict de-escalation using the cultural translation model that you've heard about in so many sermons. And so here I was with men and women who are literally walking into the opposite of peace, violence, chaos, crisis, every day, where emotions run high, and they are forced to see just the whole variety of crises. And I thought to myself, boy, it's got to be hard to imagine of working in that job, thinking you're an officer of the peace, when you just don't feel any peace around. So the heart of the training is really that we get to understand our biases and become self-aware. And that's also spiritually true for us. The way we get to peace starts with self-awareness. When we become aware of our own perspectives, we can see our own bias and see how that fuels conflict. The important thing to remember is we can't change others. We can only change ourselves, and we can change how we relate to them. So the work of peace always begins in tough situations. That truth echoes in the song that we just heard earlier this evening. Let there be peace on earth, let it begin with me. That it all starts with us. The conviction of Advent, Second Sunday, is that we focus on peace. And so we're going to try to understand more about that. Much like the world that Jesus was born into, if you remember the chaos of Jesus' birth, which we commemorate every year, the world today is a world where peace remains elusive. And so the question that we face today is the question that those New York police officers face. How do you remain a person of peace in a world that's so divided and so chaotic? And I think Swedenborg is helpful for me in understanding this, in that he has a somewhat surprising insight, I think, about peace. He teaches that peace in heaven is God's flowing into every good thing and filling it with joy. So peace is not the absence of challenge. Peace is the felt presence of God bringing order to our inner world. So that's the important thing. Peace is God bringing order to our inner world. And that happens when we have a marriage of both the good and the true, good and truth. Good happens when we put our love into action. So that's what good is. It's our love in action. Truth happens when we let that love guide our actions. So you have to have both good and truth. And that's how we operate in the world. Notice how action-oriented they are. They're not principles that you have within yourself. They're how you engage the world. So when these two things flow together, that's when peace can fill our soul. And this shows up in our lives when we desire to serve. That's when the truth is within us. And when they unite, that's peace. So this is why at the end of every service, the benediction that I love to give is, may the peace that passes all understanding be with you. Because there's really nothing better that I could give you as a pastor when you're leaving, is letting God come into you with peace. So we often we think of peace in terms of, in contrast to conflict, and circumstances around us. If they improve, we would have more peace. Yes, we all hope that difficult situations will resolve themselves. We hope that the challenging people in our lives will leave us alone. We wait for the world to calm down, and then we're convinced when that happens, we can be peaceful. We also imagine peace as the end of war and the resolution of all conflict. But it's much deeper. It arrives in our life when we allow God to reorder our inner life. And when we see it in that way, peace doesn't depend on what's happening around us. Peace depends on who is leading within us. And only when enough people in the world reorder their inner life will we see peace in the world. So Jesus famously said to his disciples, "Peace I leave you, my peace I give you. I do not give it to you the way the world gives." So the world offers a peace that depends on getting what we want. It requires controlling outcomes and managing circumstances. Jesus offers something entirely different. His peace flows from surrendering to divine direction, and that peace comes from trust. When Jesus also said, "Blessed are the peacemakers" in the Sermon on the Mount, he's describing people who allow their inner self to be reordered. Peacemakers create peace in the world because they've experienced peace within themselves through God's guidance. They have allowed the good and the true to unite within them under the Lord's leading. And that's why Jesus can stand in a storm and speak to the waves, and that's why he can face crucifixion and still offer forgiveness. The peace is an inner state, regardless of circumstances. So how does this reordering happen within our lives? In our tradition, we teach that happens when our lower loves come under the guidance of our higher loves. So what are lower loves and higher loves? Never heard of that before, maybe? Well, lower loves include your ego, your demands, your anxiety, your cravings. It's our resentment, our grudges, our need to be right, our need to win. It's the love of domination, and that is the primary blocker of peace in the world. The impulse to control others, to force outcomes, and to make the world bend to our will. So what is higher love? Higher love won't surprise you. It includes charity towards others, devotion to the truth, a desire to serve, humility before God, and a trust in divine providence. So Advent, this season as we prepare for Christmas, Christ coming into the world, it's an opportunity for us to reorder ourselves. Our lower and our higher selves, we can adjust and seek to really lift up that higher love. We see this in the story of Mary and Joseph and their journey to Bethlehem, because they're given angelic instructions that really don't make sense to them. But they follow that direction, the Lord's providence, and trust in the Lord. And they move from disorder to order, and from anxiety to trust, and from love of domination to love of serving. So I know this group always loves actionable steps. What can we do, Pastor? What can we do this week? Here are 3 things we can do to allow peace to take root this week. 1, we can allow peace to flow in us and remove any blockage to peace coming in. And that's by identifying something in our life where we're gripping the wheel too tightly, we're too much in control, we're not letting God in. That might be a relationship dynamic. It could be in our schedule. It could be in our need to be right. So all we need to do, not to make it sound too simple, but is to say the simple prayer, Lord, I surrender my need to control this. You take the lead. So if we pray that, that could be one thing we could do. What's the second thing we could do? Try this, guard your speech. Conflict usually happens when we react from our lower nature. We feel that spark of anger, and this week we're going to practice a pause. As Jesus said, leave your gifts at the altar. Do not engage immediately. So this week I'm going to ask us all to try to commit to this discipline. Say nothing negative about the other person. Not to them, not to others, not even in our own head. This is harder than it sounds. So when we rehearse our grievances over and over again, we're feeding our lower loves. We're building that case against someone. And we strengthen our need to be right and our resentment. So refusing to speak negatively is a way of reordering our loves. You're choosing not to feed the love of domination, and you're creating some love within yourself. If you want to give yourself a goal of time, try 3 days, maybe with one person, and just, no matter what happens, say nothing negative about them and think nothing negative about them. Doesn't mean you have to be a doormat. I'm just saying, just resist the energy to play into the lower self. Okay, what's the third? This one would be making room in the inn, and I use that from the image of the manger scene. So you can't have peace without the presence of God. So I would dedicate some time this week to silence. Step away from your phone, step away from the news, create a space that the divine can enter. Doesn't really matter where it is. If you're in the DC area and you want to come by the Swedenborg house, we can arrange that. But just find a space, a time where you can just let God message to you come through. Then let the peace flow in. I would suggest 10 minutes and just sit in silence and invite the good and the true to unite with you. Ask God to, in a prayer, just reorder my life. So if we begin these practices, the peace that we're seeking doesn't come automatically. It requires our cooperation. It requires examining ourselves. It requires resisting harmful impulses and choosing compassion over contempt. And we can start to experience a reordering. So Jesus says, "My peace I give you," not the peace that depends on circumstances, which allows us to stand in the storm and remain centered. The peace changes how we walk into conflict. It changes how we respond to difficulty. It changes how we relate to those who see differently than we do. When the Lord is leading within us, we can become peacemakers because we have received this peace. When the angel declares, "Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace," this is the prophecy of God's kingdom emerging within us. Peace is the sign that the Lord is becoming king in our inner life. It's a sign that we're being reordered from within. It's a sign that we're becoming the people we were created to be. This week, as we light the second candle here, we remember its meaning, that you're lighting a candle for the Lord's peace to be born in you. You're creating a space for good and true to unite within you. You're surrendering a love of domination for the love of serving. The New York police officer's questions to me, how do I create peace in a divided world? And the answer is, peace begins when we allow the Lord to reorder our loves, and peace begins within each of us. Amen. Now we will open it up to any questions. Thank you for the praying hands, Kevin.
I think Betty had her hand up. Betty, do you want?
You're on mute, Betty. This will be the one question we'll have from the hospital room tonight. So Betty gets the first question. Anybody in a hospital always gets the first question, so you're going to have to unmute if you can. That's the tricky part. Yeah, you're talking, but we can't. You're unfortunately on mute. So you might have to type it into the chat, unfortunately, if you can. Yeah, we're not hearing you, Betty. Sorry about that. Oh, there you are. You did it. Go for it.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. This week, because of all the garbage that's been going on in my life, and because a friend of mine said something that was very hurtful, or would have been in the past, I thought, I said something very similar to your prayer. I said, God, help me see this differently. Help me see the peace in this. And I was thinking about it, and I was thinking that when Jesus spoke to us, he said something like, when somebody does something to you, just turn the other cheek. And I learned a long time ago that that's pretty literal. That's literal talk and I learned it by turning to one side and looking at that. And here in this hospital, I was just telling you a few minutes ago, I've got a huge window on one side. And I turned to this side and I looked at all the stuff that's in here and all the medical stuff. And I thought, okay. And I turned like this and I saw the beauty of the world. And I said, so what you're saying is I literally have to see this differently. And that's one of the ways that I could do that. And so I basically said to myself, no one hurts me. Unless I allow it. And I allow it by being angry about it. And if I don't allow it, it doesn't happen. There is no anger involved. And I've learned a lesson. So what you said today very much agreed with what I learned this week. And it was a very important learning lesson that people don't hurt you, you hurt you. You hurt you by not accepting that they're not really saying what you think they're saying. We make judgments, and I'm terrible for that. We make judgments on what somebody means when they say something to you. And that is always going to make you angry. But if you can say, I don't know what they meant, but it really doesn't mean that much to me, and you just turn and do differently, that is the door that you open to clean out the junk. That's the closet where you hide it. So I think that I learned that lesson this week. I learned peace. And believe me, I really had many opportunities to learn peace. So I think I thank you for your lesson because that matches what I've seen and what I've learned. And I think it was wonderful. So I really appreciated it.
Thank you, Betty. And great to be talk about learning about peace in difficult situations. You're talking
I'm
about
sorry.
talk
Can you
about
talk?
talk about learning about peace in difficult situations. Uh, can everybody hear me okay? Yeah. So yeah, I was just saying this. That's finding peace in a hospital. Where you were telling me earlier, you're being poked and prodded, and facing out the window just to avoid the pain, and then you're finding lessons on peace. I'll just add one thing to what you said, Betty. That for me, I'm a control freak. Anybody who knows me knows that. So surrender is always a challenge. And but also the idea of like if someone is aggravating me, my need to be right and to challenge them is partly the story I tell myself is I'm fighting for myself. I'm fighting like they're not. I'm not gonna be a doormat. Let them walk all over me. They're wrong.
Right.
And when you do practice this exercise of, I'm not going to say anything negative about them, a couple things will emerge I've experienced. One, you de escalate the situation. People are kind of looking for a fight because they have a grudge about something else. And if you don't give it to them, they're kind of just like, what's the point? So it de escalates. And then in some situations, you'll meet people who escalate, like they totally escalate, and they never stop. And you realize some of those situations, I need to be out of that situation. That
Yeah.
person is just on a tear. Like no matter what happens, it's going to be an abusive situation. I would say in my life that's about 1,000 to 1. I do meet that one situation, but it does reveal itself. You just constantly be nice with somebody, and they're just negative, 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 and critical. But we usually start there. We usually start by assuming that they're a terrible person and we need to fight for ourselves. So I like your idea of turning the other cheek. It's not weakness. It's a strong way of de-escalating. I know with the police, one of the questions was they have to police protests. If you can imagine, if you've been watching what's going on in New York, I wouldn't want that job. I admire what the police do personally. But yeah, they were asking for advice, and I was talking about the ability to talk about safety, a value that everybody shares, and kind of moving it and de-escalating. So thank you for that, Betty. Thank you for sharing. Anybody else? Kevin.
Yeah, I just want to say that I feel like this is an eerily appropriate conversation we're having because, I was really looking forward to this year's Thanksgiving gathering. It's something we hadn't done as a family in a while, and it it went well to begin with, and then ended not so well. Um, and there was an incident where one of our relatives, who's prone to having kind of explosive episodes of anger, I found myself on the receiving end of that um, after Thanksgiving, and I do have to say that I am grateful that in the moment, a lot of what we're talking about in this conversation, I felt like was present for me. That this ability to sort of like detach and see where somebody else is coming from, and instead of escalating, like you're talking about, having compassion and forgiveness and focusing on love even verbally in the moment, and that I think helped tremendously, but to de-escalate the situation. But this person was in one of those moods where it's like, I'm just going to take this to the next level. um but yeah, so I really appreciate the message. It's super resonant for me right now, and it's something I've been struggling with since that happened, on how to be forgiving. um but yeah, it's just a work in progress. It's there on my mind. I'm grateful that it's occurring to me, and that it's difficult work to do, but I really appreciate the message today because I feel like you could be talking just directly to me. I know it's a great message for everyone, and it's a very difficult thing to do, but I appreciate it. It's good, worthy work.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that story, Kevin. And what is it about Thanksgiving? I mean, the most conflicting stories seem to be coming out of Thanksgiving. In fact, in the training that I do, I have a whole case study of a Thanksgiving that was a true case study of a person who's a woman whose father was really on the far right politically, and the daughter who's on the far left, and they're not having holidays together anymore because somebody does that sort of grenade into the room. They know it's going to blow people up, and says like the thing that is just going to irritate somebody, just to see if they get a reaction. And it just seems to be around a lot of times around holidays, and it seems to Thanksgiving. So I appreciate your story, and I appreciate how you handled it, and and it sounds like it's not really resolved for you. It sounds like you did all the right things, and you're still pondering it. But it sounds like you handled it beautifully. I mean, you sound like you're a case study of the sermon of how you're supposed to do it. So I admire you for that. That's not easy. I think you said something in the story that was interesting, that you knew this person had issues with anger, and so it probably wasn't much of a surprise, like it wasn't out of character. And I would say sometimes also mixing in alcohol, that happens around the holidays. People lose their ability to filter with alcohol, so that also can be a combustible mix. So well done, Kevin.
Thank you.
Is it still kind of haunting you a little bit?
Yeah, it definitely is, and I wondered that too, to what extent that alcohol might have played a part with this particular individual. But yeah, this cousin of mine, sort of my mother's age, um, yeah, she's had these episodes before, frequently. Like everybody knows about them. She's notorious for them, and so like otherwise, I was gonna say in the chat, like fortunately or unfortunately, I don't know, however you look at it, but it wasn't about politics. Um, but yeah, just a tendency, a proneness. I think, you try to analyze a situation like that after it happens
Yeah,
from a psychological point of view,
yeah,
that there must be a deep sense of like fear, that like of criticism or something, and then it becomes like this outward explosive, very ferocious, angry. But yeah, it was totally misplaced. It was just, one of those situations where, in particular, it's happened before, and this time around, I was like, This is very, very, very ego based. I don't see what the cause or reason for this is. It's like somebody who just was revving themselves up, was already upset, and I was in the way, you know,
Yeah,
and
you
just
became the target.
yeah, just trying to bring peace. So it is a thing where I am proud of my reaction in the moment and de-escalating, but yeah, it is something that ongoing. There is an emotional wound. You know, you
Yeah.
feel somebody who you do have love for and a good relationship with, and then kind of really does betray your trust. So yeah, I mean, living in that image of Christ, I mean, forgiving when on the cross, I mean, it just seems it's to me sometimes it's like you know, it's in your hands. I don't know, it's beyond me. You know, I want to, but I hope that I you can provide me the strength because sometimes it feels yeah that point of overwhelming where it's yeah beyond your capability. But definitely, I'm appreciative of the uh, awareness of that thing to strive for. So
Yeah, I
thank you
just
for bringing it up today.
Oh,
Appreciate it.
my pleasure. You know, I think it was. I just think you did an amazing job dealing with it. You're like a case study of how we could all practice it. And the one thing I'll say about we've all dealt with that person, different names, but that cousin. And I know I remember you telling us before Thanksgiving how excited you were to get the whole group together. So that can be even more disappointing. But one thing that I've
Definitely.
said to myself with that kind of person is if they're that critical of me, imagine how critical they are of themselves.
I have been thinking the exact same thing. And I think that was the grace that I feel grateful to have received in the moment that it occurred to me in that moment. You know, like this
Yeah,
person is like acting out of fear of a deep, 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 you know, insecurity, for lack of a better word. Maybe it's the most appropriate one, but
yeah,
something that, you know, I feel attacked, even though nobody, you know, and that's what I was trying to convey. It's like, hey, listen, nobody here is giving you a hard time, and that just upset her more, you know.
yeah.
So it's unfortunate, but yeah, I'm just dealing with the fallout. But I think what you had to say today was something I needed to hear. It's difficult, but it's I think you're spot on. It's just that difficult work to do.
It
Um,
is. It's like it's our. I think it's our life challenge, and I think that's why Jesus said, "Blessed are the peacemakers," because it's not. It's unusual. It's something we really have to work for, and it's something we don't get very much reinforced. So thanks for sharing that story. It brings the whole thing into a reality. Sorry you went through it, but you handled it beautifully. Anybody else?
thank
Anybody else would like to have a question or comment? Thoughts on peace? Go
you.
ahead, Chris. You can unmute.
I actually, this may or may not be on point, but my brother in law, Glenn Litchfield, uh, runs a Bible study class, a weekly class. And it's an interesting group of people from a variety of faith traditions and backgrounds. And so it's kind of fun. Some days it's more fun than others, and I hope he's smiling. I can't see him on the screen right now, but the truth is that the topic has been for a few weeks now forgiveness.
Yeah, pull the little chair.
And that's a little in, has become kind of a challenge thing.
Mm-hmm.
And the last person we listened to, his name was Glenn sends out a video thing we can watch,
Mm-hmm.
and was a guy whose last name was Watts,
Mm-hmm.
and he's not a pastor, he's not a spiritual guy, he is a philosopher, and just, I mean, everybody wrote like pages and pages and pages of notes. I mean, the guy spoke for 8 minutes and you end up with 8 pages of notes. I mean, there's just, nothing.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the big things was empathy that, like if you have a situation where somebody is truly, let's just say, out of control in
Yeah.
terms of their responses to you and or whatever. But I'm going to use me as the example. Okay, I have a friend of many decades, and her first response is always either anger or frustration. Always. I mean,
Yeah.
like you can bet on it.
Yeah.
And the worst thing in the world is that for me, that tends to nudge me in a negative way. And so I'm pretty good with words occasionally. And so I just go boom, right back at her kind of thing. And you end
Yep.
up in an argument and you don't even know what the argument is about. So I am a teacher. And many years ago, one of the finest things I ever learned was put yourself in their shoes, remember who your students are, think where they came from, think what they got going. And so over the years, I did develop a fairly good sense of, I guess you would call it empathy. Like when somebody comes at you like tooth and nail right away, there has to be a reason for that.
Yeah.
And it's not because of what you said,
Yeah.
you know. And so this, I guess I was just thinking today, even as you were going through those 3-step things, part of, I think, what that is it helps us to remember how it is we really need to interpret things, how we need to it's kind of almost a let go and let God thing, but not quite, because it's something we have to take into ourselves. So it's, let go of your anger, but look at it from, a perspective of knowledge and understanding. And so I really did appreciate your message today.
Thanks, Chris. And as you were talking, I was thinking when somebody has that, we all know people in our lives who are just negative from the start, right? Like you kind of don't want to be around, but there's a storm coming when they start talking. And sometimes a voice inside of me, I would say the lower loves, says, I'm not going to succumb to your bitterness. But then so I become bitter in response. So they got me. They hooked me. I got hooked because now I'm angry. Now they're angry back. Now I'm angry. Now I say, you're not going to hook me in your anger. They say they're not angry. That I made them angry. And you just feed it. So I love that. That's a great example. We have time for one more.
I have a little story.
Go ahead, Ross.
So back in 1976, when I was 28 years old, um, the association that I worked for had sort of run out of money, and so the distinguished top executive resigned or became chairman, and so the idea was I was to become the executive director. And some members on the board were very upset with this. This kid, what does he know? And so they had, but the former CEO, the chairman, was supporting it, and I had a couple of other supporters. So they had a big Donnybrook of an executive committee meeting in which I was present, in which they argued it out. And my response was just to sit there quietly and say nothing. And eventually uh, they gave me the job. And I figured that part of the reason I got the job was that I showed enough sense to shut the hell up during their little fight.
Yeah, that's a great example, Ross, because it's a good example of a de-escalation tactic too. Like, in other words, if you're not feeding that fire, people begin to feel kind of stupid when they keep saying mean things and it doesn't get a response, and they keep saying negative things and they keep saying that you're this and you're that. If you don't feed the fire, it actually begins to reflect on themselves. So I'm sure that's what happened in your situation. That's another great example of what Betty was saying earlier. Turning the cheek sounds so powerless and so weak and so not a smart move, and yet it turns out to be a really brilliant strategy for de-escalating conflict, most of the conflict we deal on a daily basis. So, well, thank you all for your participation, And we are now going to end this discussion time.